Airfares getting more expensive again, and the pressure begins before a traveler reaches the airport. For households, the cost appears as a higher ticket price, a higher fee, a more expensive family trip, or fewer low-cost options on certain routes. Air travel is not only a vacation expense, it can be part of work, school, family visits, emergency travel, and summer plans. When the cost of flying rises, it becomes another pressure point inside the household budget. The main cost behind this pressure is jet fuel. The chain is clear. Jet fuel prices rise. Airline fuel bills increase sharply. Airlines try to recover costs through fares, fees, route changes, and cost cuts. Travelers face higher trip costs and fewer low-cost options. Jet fuel is not the only factor behind airfare. Ticket prices also depend on demand, competition, route availability, airline business models, and whether airlines can pass higher costs to passengers. The verified data shows jet fuel has become a major cost pressure. Reuters quoted Southwest Airlines CEO Bob Jordan saying, "Every airline is suffering from high fuel prices." He also said, "It's your job to build your business in a way that you're resilient. And you can survive these things because they happen." That warning matters because fuel is not a small line item for airlines. Reuters reported that fuel can account for up to a quarter of airline operating expenses. When that cost rises quickly, airlines must either absorb part of it, pass part of it to travelers, cut costs elsewhere, adjust routes, or revise financial expectations. For passengers, the result can appear in several ways. A fare may rise. A baggage fee may increase. A low-cost route may become less available. A weaker airline may have less room to survive a sudden cost shock. The clearest verified fuel cost data came from the Bureau of Transportation Statistics. BTS reported on May 6, 2026, that U.S. scheduled service airlines spent $5.06 billion on fuel in March 2026. That was up 56.4% from $3.23 billion in February 2026, and up 30.4% from $3.88 billion in March 2025. Airlines used 1.615 billion gallons of fuel in March 2026. That was up 19.5% from February, but only 0.4% higher than March 2025. Fuel spending rose much faster than fuel consumption. Airlines were not only paying more because they used more fuel than a year earlier. The price per gallon was a major part of the pressure. BTS reported that the cost per gallon of airline fuel was $3.13 in March 2026. That was up 74 cents, or 30.9%. From February 2026, it was also up 72 cents, or 29.9%. From March 2025, a fuel cost surge raises airline operating costs. That pressure can move into ticket prices, fees, route availability, and travel budgets. Reuters reported the same pressure from the airline side. On May 6, 2026, Reuters said major U.S. passenger airlines spent just over $5 billion on jet fuel in March, an increase of $1.8 billion, or 56%, from February. Reuters also said the cost per gallon rose to $3.13, while fuel use rose 20%. This is how a fuel shock moves into travel. An airline cannot operate without fuel. When fuel costs jump quickly, the airline has to respond. Some of the cost may be absorbed. Some may be passed to passengers. Some may lead to fewer routes, smaller schedules, higher fees, or weaker financial outlooks. Reuters reported that major U.S. carriers had raised airfares and baggage fees, cut some routes, and made other cost cuts. Jet fuel rises, airline costs rise. Airlines adjust fares, fees, routes, and expenses. Travelers pay more or face fewer choices. BLS data shows that the pressure had already reached consumers. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that the airline fares index rose 2.8% in April 2026. It also reported that airline fares were 20.7% higher over the 12 months ending in April 2026. For a household, that is the visible outcome. The airline fuel bill is not printed on the ticket. The passenger sees the airfare, the fee, and the final trip costs. The cost pressure did not affect every airline the same way. Some airlines have more financial room. Some serve customers who are less sensitive to price. Some can use hedging to reduce exposure to spot fuel prices for a period. Some can recover a larger share of higher fuel costs through fares. Others have less room to adjust. Reuters reported that jet fuel prices surged from about $85 to $90 per barrel to $150 to $200 per barrel. It said the surge forced airlines to raise fares and revise financial outlooks. The pressure was especially serious for weaker airlines and low-cost carriers. Spirit Airlines became the clearest Verseed example. Reuters reported that Spirit Airlines ceased operations after a rescue deal failed. Spirit's restructuring plan had assumed jet fuel costs of about $2.24 per gallon in 2026 and $2.14 in 2027. By the end of April, Reuters reported that prices had climbed to about $4.51 per gallon. That gap overwhelmed the assumptions behind Spirit's restructuring plan. Reuters reported on May 5, 2026, that Spirit lawyer Marshall Hubner told bankruptcy court that sharply higher jet fuel prices left Spirit with no remaining way out of bankruptcy. Judge Sean Lane of the Southern District of New York Bankruptcy Court called Spirit's shutdown a horrible day for employees. The company is not the protagonist. The consequence is, when a low-cost airline exits, workers are affected first. Flights are canceled. Passengers lose travel options. Routes may be replaced only partially. Competition on some routes may weaken. Low fares can become less certain. Reuters reported that Spirit had about 1.7 million U.S. domestic passengers in February 2026, with a 3.9% domestic market share. A year earlier, Spirit's market share was 5.1%. After Spirit's exit, competitors prepared to fill parts of the gap. Reuters reported that JetBlue would expand service from Fort Lauderdale, one of Spirit's key markets, with 11 new cities and more flights on existing routes. Reuters also reported that major carriers rolled out rescue fare options for affected passengers. The capacity was not expected to be fully replaced. Reuters reported on May 11, 2026, that Spirit's exit was unlikely to trigger a wholesale rebuilding of capacity. Discounters had already been shrinking networks, and carriers were expected to cherry-pick Spirit routes rather than replace all seats. Frontier said the industry had filled about half of Spirit's earlier May capacity reductions, with Frontier accounting for about 40% of restored capacity. That is the household consequence of an airline exit. The shutdown does not only affect investors or employees. It can affect the traveler looking for a low-cost seat. The family trying to visit relatives, the worker booking a necessary trip, or the household trying to keep travel affordable. Spirit's shutdown reduced low-cost airline capacity, and competitors replaced it selectively. For affected passengers, the result was fewer low-fare options on some routes, more uncertainty, and added pressure on travelers who depended on budget airlines. Reuters reported that Spirit's exit lifted airfares, while the budget airline model remained under pressure from high fuel costs and limited pricing power. That phrase, limited pricing power, is central to the story. Low-cost airlines often depend on price-sensitive travelers. If fares rise too much, some passengers may not book. If fares do not rise enough, the airline may not recover higher fuel costs. That creates a narrow path. Reuters quoted Avelo Airlines CEO Andrew Levy saying, "Limited pricing power made higher fuel prices a little harder for companies like mine." Avelo's fuel bill rose from about $2.56 per gallon in February to roughly $4.71 per gallon in April. Reuters reported that Avelo raised base fares by about $20, lifted fees, and used promotions to sustain demand. That is another example of the cost chain. Jet fuel rises. A budget carrier faces higher costs. The carrier raises base fares and fees, while still using promotions to keep demand. Travelers may pay more, but the airline may still not recover the full cost increase. Higher fuel costs do not affect every airline or every route in the same way. Reuters reported that JetBlue expected to recover only 30 to 40% of higher fuel costs. Frontier expected to recover about 35 to 45%. That means airlines could not simply pass all higher fuel costs to passengers. For consumers, the effect can still be higher fares and fees. For airlines, the effect can be compressed margins. For weaker carriers, the effect can be route cuts, financial stress, or shutdown. The same cost shock moves through the system in different ways. Travelers pay more. Airlines absorb part of the pressure. Workers can lose jobs. Routes can change. Low-cost competition can weaken. Family travel becomes harder to plan. There are also important cautions. Jet fuel is a major cost pressure, but it is not the only reason airfare rises. Fare outcomes depend on demand, competition, route availability, and airline strategy. Reuters reported that Ryanair was cutting summer airfares to keep passenger volumes because of customer nervousness, even though fuel costs remained elevated. Ryanair CEO Michael O'Leary said, "There is a little bit of customer nervousness out there." He also said, "We're having to do a little bit of price discounting to keep the volumes going." That shows why the airfare story cannot be reduced to fuel alone. If demand weakens, an airline may discount fares even while fuel is expensive. If demand remains strong, airlines may have more room to raise prices. The fuel shock creates pressure, but market conditions determine how much of that pressure reaches passengers immediately. Fuel hedging also matters. BTS noted that airline fuel costs may be affected by hedging, which are contracts allowing airlines to limit exposure to future price changes. Reuters reported that Ryanair had hedged 80% of its jet fuel requirements through the next March at $67 per barrel, less than half the current spot price. Hedging can limit exposure for a period. It does not remove the broader industry pressure, but it can change how quickly a given airline feels the full effect of higher fuel prices. The timeline shows how quickly the pressure built. In March 2025, U.S. scheduled service airlines spent $3.88 billion on fuel, used 1.609 billion gallons, and paid $2.41 per gallon, according to BTS. In February 2026, airlines spent $3.23 billion on fuel, used 1.352 billion gallons, and paid $2.39 per gallon. In March 2026, airlines spent $5.06 billion on fuel, used 1.615 billion gallons, and paid $3.13 per gallon. Fuel expenditure rose 56.4% from February and 30.4% from March 2025. By the end of April 2026, Reuters reported jet fuel prices had climbed to about $4.51 per gallon, far above Spirit's restructuring assumptions. On May 2nd, Reuters reported Spirit's shutdown, including canceled flights at LaGuardia Airport. On May 5th, Reuters reported from bankruptcy court that Spirit's lawyers said higher jet fuel prices left the airline with no remaining way out. On May 6th, BTS released the March fuel data, and Reuters reported that major U.S. passenger airlines spent just over $5 billion on jet fuel in March. BLS reported that airline fares rose 2.8% in April and were 20.7% higher over the previous 12 months. On May 11th, Reuters reported that Spirit's exit lifted airfares, while the budget model remained under pressure. On May 15th, Reuters reported that jet fuel prices had surged from $85 to $90 per barrel to $150 to $200 per barrel, forcing airlines to raise fares and revise financial outlooks. The pattern is clear. Fuel costs rose sharply. Airline fuel bills jumped. Consumer airfare indexes rose. A weaker airline exited. Budget carriers faced limited pricing power. Competitors replaced only part of lost capacity. Travelers faced higher prices and fewer low-cost options. The current reality is a travel cost story. BTS reported U.S. scheduled service airlines spent $5.06 billion on fuel in March 2026. BLS reported airline fares rose 2.8% in April and were 20.7% higher over 12 months. Reuters reported that airlines had raised fares and baggage fees, cut some routes, and made other cost reductions. Spirit Airlines shutdown remains the clearest verified example of an airline-level consequence. Reuters reported Spirit's fuel assumptions were overwhelmed by jet fuel prices near $4.51 per gallon by the end of April, compared with restructuring assumptions of $2.24 for 2026 and $2.14 for 2027. The budget airline model remains under pressure. Avelo raised base fares by about $20, lifted fees, and used promotions after its fuel bill rose sharply. JetBlue and Frontier expected to recover only part of their higher fuel costs. For ordinary travelers, the unresolved pressure is affordability and access. Higher airfares make family travel more expensive. Higher baggage fees raise the total cost of a trip. Route cuts can reduce convenient options. A low-cost carrier exit can weaken price competition on some routes. Business, school, family, and emergency travel can all become harder to budget. The broader conclusion is measured. Jet fuel is not the only reason airfare is rising. Not every airline faces the same risk. Not every route changes the same way. Some airlines hedge fuel. Some discount fares when demand weakens. Large carriers may have more room than weaker budget airlines. The verified evidence shows a clear chain. Jet fuel prices surged. Airline fuel bills rose sharply. Airlines raised fares and fees, cut routes, or reduced costs. A weaker carrier exited. Low-cost's capacity was only partly replaced. Travelers faced higher airfares and fewer low-cost options. This is how an energy cost becomes a household travel cost. The fuel is bought by airlines. The pressure moves through operating costs. The response appears in fares, fees, routes, and capacity. The final impact reaches families, workers, students, and anyone who needs to fly. Airfare is getting more expensive again because the cost of flying is rising before the passenger ever books the ticket.